To get started looking at controls, we will build a very simple form. Despite the simplicity of the form, we will be able to look at a number of issues of working with controls in WPF. To begin, we will add rows to our grid and 2 columns. You can see that all of the rows are scaled to have a height of auto, and the 2 columns are in a 1-to-2 relationship. The left column will be used as a prompt, the right column to hold each of our controls. The first control that we will use to act as a prompt is a text block. There are a number of properties that you can assign to the text block, and one way to see that is through IntelliSense. You can see that there are properties and there are also events that you can assign to that text block. The most common property for a text block is the text property, and that is what will be displayed in the text block. We would like to set up some alignment with our text block so that it sits in the left-hand column but flush to the right. For that, we will use horizontal alignment equal right, and we will also set the vertical alignment so that it is aligned to the bottom of the row. Finally, to allow a little bit of room around the text block, we're going to set the margin equal to 5. The first control that we will put into the right-hand column is a text box. Like text block, it also uses a text property if you want to initialize the text box with text. We don't want to do that, and so what we're going to do with our text box is leave the text property blank. Let's go ahead and tell it that we want this in column 1. Remember that 0 is the default both for row and column, and that we want our text box to have a width of 250, so it's nice and big enough to hold a full name, and it will need a height of, let's say, 20. We'll set the horizontal alignment to left so that it aligns with the center of the screen, or more accurately, with the columns, which are in a 1-to-2 relationship. And we will set the vertical alignment to bottom so that it aligns with the prompt that we created with the previous text block. We'll also need to set a margin of 5 so that the two line up. We can see what this is going to look like even before running the application by switching to Design View. And we see we've got the full name, and then we've got our text box. We can switch back to XAML View, and in fact we can split the screen either vertically or horizontally so that we can keep an eye on the design even as we're adding to the XAML. We can, in fact, drag and drop controls directly onto the design view and then adjust their properties through the Properties window. Let's create a second prompt with another text block by taking text block and dragging it into the design view. Notice it puts the text block directly into the XAML as we would expect, but it doesn't have everything set up exactly the way we want. The horizontal alignment is set to left, and that's made up for with a large margin. It didn't figure out which row we wanted. It set it in the bottom row, which is grid row 7, and so forth. To get maximum control, we could, of course, go to the Properties window and change those properties that we're uncomfortable with, or we can come directly into the XAML and fix it up here. Let's set the horizontal alignment to right. Let's set the margin to 5. We'll go ahead and set the vertical alignment to bottom. And we'll set the grid row to 1 that is the second row. We can turn text wrapping off as it doesn't apply in this case. We can set the text off because we don't want to have text block as the text, but instead we'll replace that with what we do want, which is a prompt saying sex. We're going to collect male or female. Let's take out the redundant vertical alignment. And now we have our text block set up the way we want. What we want to put into the right-hand column are radio buttons, one for male and one for female. Because we want to put two controls into the same cell, we need to work out a way to align them so that they're not one on top of the other. The easiest way to do that is with a stack panel whose orientation is equal to horizontal. We need to make sure that that stack panel is going to be in the right row, so we'll set grid row equal to 1. And we want to set it to be in the second column. So we'll set grid column equal to 1 as well. We can set the vertical alignment either to left or, if we like, to stretch, which will fill the entire cell. And we can do the same thing with the horizontal alignment. We now have a stack panel completely filling that cell. Inside of that, we'll create a radio button. And we want to have two radio buttons, and we want them to be mutually exclusive. To do that, we simply create a group name, and we share that group name between all the radio buttons in the group. So we'll call this group name sex. We'll set its text. Now, the way you set a text on a radio button, and in fact most controls, is with the content property. And the reason for that is that the content need be not only text, but can be other controls and can be quite complex. In this case, we're going to set it just to the text male. We don't need to set up the alignment vertical or horizontal because that's been taken care of by the stack panel. However, we do want to have the first radio button checked. So let's set the isChecked property to true. We want to make sure that it lines up properly with the prompt. So let's go back and add margin equal 5. And that will take care of our alignment. We can copy and paste our radio button to create a second one that preserves the group name, but will change the content to female, and we'll take out the isChecked property, and that defaults to false. We only want to have one checked at a time. And we can see down here in the design view that we now have the male and female radio buttons side by side. Let's collect a little bit of information about what kinds of computers the user owns by using checkboxes. We'll start by putting in a text block. That text block acts as the prompt. Next, we want to add another stack panel with orientation equal horizontal. And inside that stack panel, we're going to place a checkbox. We'll set the checkbox's content to desktop to capture whether they use a desktop computer, and margin equal 5. And then we can add a second checkbox for laptop computer and a third checkbox for tablet computer. And you can see once again in the design that we now have 3 checkboxes. We next want to capture the user's job. So we'll put in a text block for row equal 3 saying your job. And we have a number of choices of how to collect the job. We could, of course, put a text box, or we could put a list box with a list of all of the possible jobs. Of course, that would take up quite a bit of room. I'm inclined to use a combo box, which gives us the best of both worlds. That is to say, it takes up a minimal amount of room, but does give us a list we can offer. Within the definition of the combo box, we can add items to the combo box by simply adding combo box item objects, and we set the content of each to whatever we want to have appear in the combo box. Let's copy and paste that so that we have a number of entries, and of course let's change these so that they reflect different job titles. And so we see in the designer we have your job and a drop down. It has no contents yet, and when we run it we will drop it down and pick one of these titles. Before we finish, however, I'd like to add a calendar. We'll use that for the promised delivery date. So let's add the prompt in the fifth row, that is grid row equal 4, and then bring a calendar control into our working code, just dropping that in place. Now when we drop the calendar control in place, a lot of things will get set up, but that calendar control, of course, will be in row 1, column 1. That's not where we want it. So we'll go ahead and we'll add some properties to the calendar control. And if we come down to the designer and scroll down, we can see that the calendar control is in place. Let's run this application and get a sense of what these controls look like. So we see the full name and the text box where we can fill in the full name. We can change the radio buttons. We can check which types of computers we have, drop down the job combo box and choose the appropriate job, choose a delivery date. There's much more to do with this form, but that's a start on adding controls to a WPF form and gives a sense of some of the similarities among all of the controls, where we can set the horizontal alignment, vertical alignment, margin, in most cases the content. Working with these controls falls under a pattern that simplifies learning how to use each new control.